September 3rd, 13th, and 23rd. Those are not just dates, they are invisible tripwires. And the reason you are hearing about them right now is because somewhere deep down you already know something feels off about this stretch of the month. That quiet hum of unease you cannot quite name. The way your brain keeps circling back to the same anxious thought about, without permission, how your sleep goes shallow and your patience evaporates for no apparent reason during these specific windows. That's not imagination running wild. That's your system picking up on something your conscious mind hasn't translated yet. We have all had those periods where life feels like walking through a room where everyone else knows a secret you are missing, where everyone minor inconveniences hits with disproportionate weight, where you say something you instantly regret or make a small decision that somehow tilts everything sideways for weeks. And here's the part that hits different. Those 3 dates clustered so suspiciously close together are not random calendar markings. They are convergence points where multiple invisible forces align in ways that amplify everything that's already happening beneath the surface of your everyday awareness. Those ordinary digits on your phone screen represents thresholds, not the kind you consciously walk through, but the kind you stumble across by accident and cannot undo the navigation of. You have experienced this before, haven't you? Through maybe you never connected the dots in every way that you let yourself feel the pattern. The particular texture of those days when you focus dissolves like sugar in not coffee. And you cannot understand that. When your filter disappears and you say exactly what's been lurking unexamined in the back of your mind. When you open your mouth and watch yourself sabotage something important in real time without understanding the impulse that drove you here or there. You have had mornings where you woke up already exhausted, already defensive, already scanning for threats that hadn't materialized yet. And by afternoon, you'd somehow accumulated 3 new conflicts, one fresh regret and a sinking certainty that you'd mishandled something you couldn't even identify. That sensation that is not a scattered accident. It's the byproduct of moving through periods when life normal rules of cause and effect get temporarily wrapped. When the distance between a momentary impulse and its full consequence shrinks dramatically. When the ordinary buffer of clarity and patience that usually protects you from your own worst instincts simply evaporates without warning. Just think back to the last time you had one of those days that started and then you slid progressively sideways through a series of small decisions that individually seemed harmless but collectively assembled into something you'd never have chosen deliberately. Maybe you responded too quickly to a text you should have said with, or you made a financial choice that looked reasonable in the moment but felt inexplicably wrong the next morning. Or you shared something vulnerable with someone who hadn't earned that access and immediately felt the vulnerability turned against you. My voice is trembling. So, the disorienting part wasn't the individual choices themselves. Everyone makes slightly off decisions occasionally. It was the distinct quality of those days. The way you seemed to lose access to your own internal compass. The way your naturally reliable judgment turned to static at precisely the moments you needed it most. September's cluster hits like that, but with more intensity and less margin for error, because you are not dealing with a single point. You are navigating through 3 separate pressure zones packed so tightly together that the residue from one hasn't settled before the next one triggers. What you are actually looking at when you mark those dates on your mental map is a convergence where multiple streams of possibility narrow into a single channel, where choices that typically have broad ranges of acceptable outcomes instead have compressed margins, where the consequences of missteps arrive more quickly and last longer than you'd normally expect. The discomfort you feel when you hear about these dates comes from somewhere real, not supernatural, not mystical, but deeply practical and surprisingly concrete. You have noticed how certain times of year carry some kind of weight, not some actions in different contexts, products, vastly different results. How your own energy and clarity and luck seem to follow patterns you cannot quite explain, but definitely experience. Those are not accidental patterns. They are the visible evidence that proves that timing shapes outcomes in ways that precede the exceed of your conscious understanding. The first of these dates catches you off guard because you are still settling into September's rhythms, still recalibrating from summer's looser structures into fall's more demanding expectations. And that transitional vulnerability makes you more reactive and less reflective than usual. We'll talk about the shift of seasons as if it's purely atmospheric. But your nervous system knows better. It registers shifts in light, temperature, social expectations, and internal pressure simultaneously, leaving you operating with compromised capacity at precisely the moment when demands on your resources actually increase. So, September the 3rd lands like a hook you never saw coming. Not because anything inherently wrong exists in the date itself, but because you are navigating through an intersection where multiple unseen currents converge in ways that require more awareness than you typically bring to an ordinary Tuesday. Your capacity for measurement response shrinks your tolerance for or something, and your impulse to resolve tension, even through counterproductive actions, intensifies dramatically. So by the time you hit September the 13th, the accumulated tension from that initial disruption hasn't fully resolved, leaving you operating from a residual agitation that colors every subsequent judgment and interaction. You are more likely to misinterpret neutral signals as hostile, to hear criticism where none exists, to project your own unexamined anxiety onto situations that would normally barely register. This is the midpoint pressure, the compounding effect of one subtle disorientational layering onto another until you cannot clearly distinguish which feeling belongs to which trigger, leaving you globally unsettled without a clear target for that unsettledness. The danger here isn't dramatic confrontation or obvious catastrophe. It's the quieter erosion of trust in yourself and others, the slow accumulation of small misalignments that collectively reconfigure relationships and opportunities in ways you only recognize later, when the pattern has become too established to easily unwind. The third date, September the 23rd, arrives as both a release and a final test, the last act of sequence that's been quietly reorganizing your internal and external landscape for weeks. If you have been moving through this stretch, unaware, reactive rather than observant, impulse rather than intentional, this is where the cumulative effects of those earlier days crystallize into patterns you will be living with far longer than the constrained window itself. Not punishment, not fate, just the straightforward consequence of navigating high-stakes terrain without realizing the terrain's nature and adjusting your approach accordingly. So, the decisions you make during this compressed period carry more weight than they would at other times, because the conditions amplify whatever you put into motion. Good choices expand, but so do regrettable ones. And the expansion happens faster than your usual capacity to course correct. What makes these particular dates genuinely significant is not any mystical property, but the simple fact that they fall within a period when your usual buffers, patience, perspective, emotional regulation, impulse control also, are all operating at a reduced capacity with internal pressures and expectations intensify simultaneously. Your ability to hold multiple perspectives, to pause before reacting, to distinguish between urgent and important, these normally reliable faculties become temporarily compromised without your awareness, because the degradation happens gradually rather than all at once. You don't notice yourself getting shorter-tempered, more defensive, more prone to impulse decisions, because the shift is incremental, a degree at a time, until suddenly you're looking at choices you'd normally never make, and wondering how you arrived in this unfamiliar territory. Here's what you might not have articulated about those days when everything feels slightly off, but you cannot pinpoint why. Your internal recalibration system relies on consistent input to maintain accuracy. And these windows introduce precisely the kind of variable input that scrambles calibration without triggering obvious alarm bells. You are not experiencing dramatic signals requiring emergency response. You are experiencing subtle but systematic distortions that gradually skew your perception and judgment until you are navigating from a faulty map without realizing the map's condition. The friend who seems unusually hostile might actually be responding to something you said that you have completely forgotten. Like the opportunity that slips away might have required a decisive move you couldn't bring yourself to make. The relationship that crumbles might have needed the patience you couldn't access in that specific moment. The discomfort you feel when someone warns you about these dates is valuable information. Not because you should be afraid, but because the discomfort itself, the signals that you already know something relevant that your conscious mind hasn't fully processed. Your intuitive systems register patterns that your analytical systems cannot yet explain, and that mismatch produces exactly the kind of uneasy alert that gets dismissed as anxiety or superstition when it's actually your deeper intelligence trying to get your attention. So paying attention doesn't mean panicking, doesn't mean changing your plans, doesn't mean hiding or avoiding life. It means recognizing that you are moving through terrain with different contours that you usually navigate, and adjusting accordingly. Too much vocabulary, I think. So here is what you can do with this awareness. So slow down, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but just enough to create space between impulse and action. Add a beat before responding to provocative messages. A breathe before making decisions that cannot be unmade. A moment of genuine pause before committing to anything that will echo past these concentrated days. Notice when you feel the familiar tightening that precedes reactive choices and name it for what it is, not the situation demanding immediate response, but your own compromised capacity, temporarily misinterpreting the situation's urgency. Increase your observational attention without increasing your anxious attention. Watching patterns rather than manufacturing catastrophes. Noticing the subtle ways your interactions shift during these periods without over-interpreting every exchange as significant. And most importantly, recognize that you are not being singled out or targeted by these concrete periods. You are experiencing a universal human phenomenon that affects everyone navigating through similar temporal convergences. The people around you are also moving through these same compressed awareness windows, also operating with reduced buffers, also more likely to misinterpret and misrespond. And that collective vulnerability creates a social dynamic where everyone's defensive and reactive tendencies get amplified simultaneously. Your relationships might feel more strained. Your workplace might feel more tense. Your family interactions might feel more charged. And while some of that might reflect actual issues needing attention, some of it merely represents the temporary atmospheric pressure of synchronized vulnerability. By the time you reach the last of these three thresholds, you will have an opportunity to access what you have actually experienced, what choices you made, what patterns you observed, what you might do differently next time. The calendar presents similar configurations. This isn't about perfect navigation. It's about aware navigation, about recognizing that you have more agency in these moments than you typically exercise because your default response to discomfort is to move through it automatically rather than observing and adjusting. The regret you might feel about ignoring these signals doesn't come from missing some external warning. It comes from recognizing that you knew something was different and chose not to adjust. That you felt the subtle disorientation and you dismissed it. That you sensed the compressed consequences and acted as if the normal rules still applied. These dates are not dangerous in themselves. They are concentrated expressions of patterns that exist always but become more visible, more accessible to awareness during these compressed windows. The dangerous, and actually you are not in dangerous, you just need to pay attention. And you will recognize the difference by paying attention to that internal pressure, the sense of urgency that sometimes signals genuine importance and sometimes signals nothing more than your temporary shortened time horizon. You are not at the mercy of these dates. You are not helpless or vulnerable or doomed to make mistakes you will regret. You have access to awareness, to choice, to the capacity to observe your own responses and adjust to them in real time. So, the warning about these days isn't prediction, it's description. Naming what's actually happening so you can respond appropriately rather than maintaining confused about why everything suddenly feels harder, heavier, more. The regret you might feel later isn't about ignoring the warning itself. It's about ignoring your own internal signals that something about this period requires different attention than your default approach provides. So when September arrives and you will feel the familiar compression, the slight shift in texture, the barely noticeable but persistently present sense that something's different about these particular days, you can remember that you have been here before, that you have navigated similar transitions successfully, that you have more resources available than you typically access, and that the compressed period ends like every period ends, dissolving back into ordinary time with ordinary pressure and ordinary responses. And the specific dates matter because they concentrate that experience, not because they create the experience. The warning matters because it gives you permission to trust your perception, to adjust without apology, to navigate with intention rather than reacting on autopilot, through terrain that requires more attention than autopilot can provide. You will move through these dates however you move through them, and whatever happens will happen, and you will learn whatever there is to learn. You will carry whatever you carry forward into the rest of September and into whatever follows. The point isn't to avoid the period, but to move or to meet it with your eyes open, with your awareness engaged, with your choices made consciously rather than by default. The regret you might feel about ignoring the pattern wouldn't be about failing to heed some external warning. It would be about neglecting your own internal knowledge, dismissing your own perception, choosing comfort over awareness, and then being surprised when the choices you made during compromised conditions produced compromised results. September's cluster approach you and you approach them. And somewhere in that mutual approach is the opportunity for genuine understanding, for real preparation, for the simple satisfaction of navigating a challenging period with more skill than you might have accessed without the awareness this perspective provides. The feeling that prompted you to pay attention to these dates isn't paranoia or superstition. It's the reliable signal that something about this period deserves different treatment, that compression creates conditions you ignore at your own expense, and that the most rational response to concentrated vulnerability is concentrated awareness. Not fear, not avoidance, not dramatic lifestyle changes, just the ordinary practice of noticing when the terrain changes and adjusting your approach accordingly. That's all anyone can do. And that's exactly enough.